Chapter 4 The Great Heist. The sun had set again by the time the human castle was finally within sight. Swordfish was annoyed at how long the journey had taken him, especially given he had left at the crack of dawn. But as he had been swift to discover, his frogs were neither as fast as he was, nor did they have the same stamina. They were also very easily distracted. He had lost count of the number of times he had been forced to order his troops to double back and find a member who had broken off from the march to chase a dragonfly or stand proudly on top of a mushroom or something. He couldn't deny that the scenes were cute, and he didn't blame the simple creatures for enjoying the natural world, given how often they just lazed in his hoard. But still, they had a job to do, and every distraction was a waste of time. But finally, after several hours had passed and all pit stops, side treks, and scoldings were finished, they finally made it to the edge of the woods. The tree line rested at the top of one of the many sweeping hills that rolled out before Swordfish for miles and miles. Under the pale glow of the moon and stars, he couldn't help but look on in wonder. He could see the faint sparkling of distant rivers catching the moonlight, shimmering in the dark like diamonds. He could see the silhouette of other mountain ranges against the tapestry of the midnight sky far in the distance, with copses of trees scattered across the hills, all turning orange and red with the passing of the season. He didn't often get to see such vistas, and even his frantic mind had to stop and just drink it all in for a moment. He was quick to shake himself out of his trance, however, and returned his attention to the here and now. He lowered his eyes and peered into the heart of the grasslands. And there, presiding over a junction where three rivers met before carrying on to the west, was the human castle. It was a sturdy and majestic structure, carved from reinforced brickwork and surrounded on all sides by acres upon acres of densely packed farmland. It wasn't the first castle Swordfish had seen. It wasn't even the first one he would have been inside of. But this time was different. He didn't have his elders with him to watch his back. He didn't have Pondhopper to keep him company. And most of all, this was where the king lived. The elders often warned the hatchlings against going anywhere near a seat of human power like this, for the kings of men would have the finest knights and dragon slayers among their number. To approach unprepared was suicide. But if Avorix would do nothing to save Hopper, then Swordfish was left with no other choice.
Ribbit.
Hush, Kevin,
Swordfish whispered to the large bullfrog.
We don't want to give our position away.
Kevin blinked, then snapped his tongue out to slap wetly across Swordfish's cheek. The blue dragonling shouted in alarm and recoiled before turning to level a glare at the unrepentant amphibian.
Ribbit.
Let's just get a move on, Kevin's expression seemed to say, as if he were getting impatient. Swordfish rolled his eyes and turned back to the human keep.
Okay, geesh. Come on, let's get closer.
Together, Swordfish and his small army moved towards the human castle. They avoided the main road, not wanting to accidentally run afoul of any human patrols. Even this late at night, the flickering lantern light of men on horseback roaming up and down the highway could be seen from a mile off. Instead, they picked their way slowly but surely through the hills and wild shrubbery. As they drew closer, it slowly occurred to Swordfish just how large this castle was. Several monolithic towers rose toward the heavens, their steepled roofs looking ready to rend the sky and steal the moon. The central keep was surrounded on all sides by towering walls, where more firelight was visible. Swordfish's nerves started creeping up on him as they drew close enough to make out the individual bricks in the wall, but he swallowed his fear and pressed on. Eventually, he and his entourage came to a stop not far from one of the gates to the castle courtyard. Two men dressed in padded armor with rounded helms stood before it, both of them looking to be dozing in place. They must have been out on guard duty all day.
Now how do we get in?
Swordfish wondered, casting his eyes up and down the structure. There were windows he could conceivably climb through. The problem would be reaching them. They were all built too high for him to reach, and once more he cursed his still-developing wings. There might have been some manner of secret tunnel somewhere that would let him get into the castle undetected, but finding something like that would basically be impossible without some idea of where to begin looking. As he sat there, hidden in the bushes with his hoard, Swordfish's eyes were drawn to the right by the sound of hooves on dirt. A lone guardsman on horseback was approaching the castle, his lantern casting dark, dancing shadows across his round face, his cheeks flushed from the cold. As the soldier approached, an idea came to Swordfish. He turned to the frogs gathered around him with a smirk.
You guys ready to get us in? 'Cause I got a plan. Ribbit.
Internally, the frog that spoke was resigning itself to its inevitable demise. William had been having a very long, very boring night. Over the last 6 or so hours, he had taken his horse, a sprightly brown charger named Fiona, and ridden up and down the various roads that connected the castle to the rest of the kingdom in a long, rigid circuit. He and 12 others maintained a strict patrol route, covering each other's ground numerous times over the night to make sure there was nothing amiss. It was an important job, of course. The king needed protection while in the castle, and so did his daughter. Intellectually, William acknowledged that being tasked with protecting the king's lands and holdings was an honor. Intellectually, he knew that what he was doing was for the benefit of his homeland and the lords he served. Intellectually, he knew that it was a vital duty that needed to be done. Emotionally, he was about ready to yeet himself into the nearest thorn bush buck naked just to have an excuse not to do it anymore. Nothing ever happened on these watches. It was nice to get out of the hubbub of the castle sometimes, sure, but for this long? And with no one to talk to but a horse? As much as he loved horses, they weren't particularly good at holding a conversation, considering that, well, their entire vocabulary consisted of snorts, huffs, puffs, screams, and the occasional vindictive fart. But finally, after doing his duty and running slow laps around the castle for 6 hours, he was ready to come back into the walls of the keep, where there was booze, beds, board games, books, and maybe a brawl in the barracks if he was lucky. Not that any sort of steam-venting altercation like that would last for more than a minute before Hugo came breaking down the door. He was the finest knight the king had, and his reputation was well earned, yes, but that man did not know how to relax, or let anyone else relax for that matter. But William chased any thoughts of Hugo from his mind as he came up to the castle gates. The reinforced 4-layer wooden door was closed and locked during the night. He didn't know the names of the 2 guards standing watch, nor did he care to learn. He simply nodded his head in greeting as he approached. "Hail!" "Hey," the guard on William's left answered, taking a few steps forward. "Find anything tonight?" "Yeah, a great big dragon turtle eating the king's favorite lamb," William said with a roll of his eyes. "Of course I didn't find anything. None of us ever finds anything." The guard chuckled. "Ha, ain't that the truth? All right, let's get you inside." He made his way back to the gate. He pounded on it with his fist before bellowing, "Patrol's back, open her up." A moment later, the great gate swung open with a deep groan that William felt in his ribs. Fiona shifted beneath him, letting off an eager snort. Clearly, she was just as ready to be home as William was.
Ribbit.
William frowned. Curious, he looked down and to the left to see a yellowish frog perched on the side of the road, right beside him and Fiona. It was staring up at him, its expression impossible to read. Did this thing want something from him? Then the frog attacked. Faster than William could react, the frog's tongue shot from its mouth, stretching across the distance between them, and smacked into Fiona's exposed flank. William's eyes widened in realization of what was about to happen a second too late. At that moment, Fiona the horse became convinced that she was about to die. She reared onto her hind legs with a high, billowing neigh and threw William from her back. He hit the ground with a grunt of pain, the air driven from his lungs. Above him, Fiona loosed another shriek before turning and galloping off full tilt into the night. William counted himself lucky that she didn't trample him on her way out. "What the?" one of the guards on the other side of the gate shouted. "What's gotten into her?" "Who cares?" another barked, already moving to get after her. "That's one of the king's horses! After it!" William gave off a little groan as 4 armored pairs of boots went thundering past him, the soldiers calling fruitlessly after the horse. He rolled over onto his belly and, with a curse, forced himself after them. Fiona might have legally been the king's property, but William was her rider. No way he was going to let her run away like this. "Well," he thought as he charged into the night, "at least I'm not bored anymore." Unbeknownst to William, as he and the other guards went after the horse, a small army of quadrupeds slipped into the castle courtyard through the now unguarded gate. Swordfish had to resist the urge to laugh as the frog he had chosen for that mission caught up with him and the others in the courtyard.
Nice job, Robert,
he said in a cheerful whisper, patting the frog on the head.
Rabbit.
Swordfish gave him a big grin, then turned his attention to their new surroundings. Distracting the guards had been mercifully easy, but they had only gotten past one hurdle. They were now in the heart of the castle, hiding in the stable by the gate on the edge of the courtyard. A handful of horses were sleeping not far away, snoring peacefully on the floor, or standing up in the case of that one weirdo over there. The courtyard was sizable, with all manner of human constructions scattered around the edges. A fenced-in area where the grass had been cleared to dirt, a line of practice targets and training dummies, and a large wooden platform with some sort of upside-down L-shaped beam on top of it that Swordfish got a bad feeling from. There were others, but Swordfish had neither the time nor the inclination to try and deduce their function. The guards up on the walls hadn't spotted him when he and his horde had come in, thankfully, and their attention seemed focused mainly on the commotion the fleeing horse had made. That gave Swordfish and his team a small window where no one was paying them any attention. He quickly scanned the courtyard again, searching for a viable means of entry. There were more windows on this level, lower down to the ground, but they were also narrow. Swordfish cringed. He was by no means fat. In fact, he was actually quite fit for a dragon his size. But even his slender frame couldn't hope to squeeze through one of those narrow slits. He doubted he could even get his muzzle through. Going in through the main door would probably be a bad idea, too. He needed another option. Eventually, Swordfish's eyes landed on a smaller door tucked out of the way on the right end of the courtyard, nestled behind a decorative tree that had lost half its leaves already. Swordfish did not know much about the finer points of human architecture, but that door looked notably less important than the front one, which meant that was probably his ticket in.
Come on,
he whispered, keeping himself low to the ground as he scurried out of the stable. The frogs followed dutifully along behind him. They stuck to the base of the wall, moving quickly but quietly around the edge of the courtyard. Most of them. When they reached the door, Swordfish took a moment to do a quick head count of the frogs. To his shock, one was missing. Kevin. He quickly cast his eyes about for any sign of the missing frog. He spotted Kevin in the dead center of the courtyard, staring distantly up at the towers. Swordfish groaned and pawed at the ground, creating a soft thump to get his attention.
Kevin! Come on! We gotta get inside!
He whispered urgently. The frog hesitated, sending one more look up at the towers. There was an odd aura about the frog's movements. He almost looked sad. His movement was slow and sluggish as he hopped over to join Swordfish by the door. The dragon tilted his head.
You okay, buddy?
Kevin did not answer. A quick application of frog tongue managed to pull the handle and open the door, allowing Swordfish and his cohorts to slip quietly into the castle. At this late hour, there didn't seem to be anyone up and about. The corridors were quiet, save for the low whistling of a draft through the stone passages. There were no sources of light in the narrow halls, and Swordfish felt glad that, as a dragon, he had better night vision than many other creatures. Still, though, he could barely see more than a few feet in front of him, and it was utterly colorless. The side door they had taken led into a series of narrow corridors that crisscrossed many times over. It seemed strange to him that humans would make their castle so convoluted on the inside, not to mention how bland it was to look at. The exterior had been so grand and majestic, yet the interior looked no better than the inside of a narrow, angular cave.
Maybe,
he thought,
this isn't the main part of the castle. Kings and princesses have servants, right? Maybe these are servant tunnels.
Of course, if these were servant tunnels, then that meant he wouldn't find Pondhopper here. She would be wherever the princess was, and that meant Swordfish had to brave other, more heavily guarded parts of the castle. His claws clicked on the stone-cold floor as he walked, and the wet slaps of the frog's webbed feet on the floor behind him echoed up and down the passages. Every so often, one of the frogs would let out a croak or a gurgle, making clear their distaste for this place. Swordfish couldn't blame them. He was on edge too. Eventually, they came to another wooden door. It was tall and narrow, but otherwise uninteresting to look at. There was a simple handle set into it. Swordfish looked up at it and scrunched up his face. Slowly, he crept up to the panels and pressed the side of his head up against the wood, listening for movement. He didn't hear anything, but he still felt uneasy. It was possible that there was a guard out there, and they just weren't moving. Still, he couldn't keep wandering around the servants' passages all night or he wasn't going to get anything done. He would just have to risk it.
Kevin,
he whispered, turning to the dark frog.
Get the door, please.
Kevin replied, taking 2 quick hops to the base of the door, then shooting his tongue up to the latch. There was a wet slap and a metallic clack, and the door drifted a few inches as it became unlatched. Swordfish grinned and patted the frog on the head before stepping forward and gently nosing the door open. The corridor beyond was twice as tall as the one he had just emerged from, and at least 3 times as wide. A torch was burning on the far wall, casting a dancing light across the corridor. Swordfish felt a small amount of the tension in his muscles withdraw at the sight of the first light in a while. But he did not let himself get complacent. Slowly and carefully, he poked his head further out and looked both ways down the hall. To the left, it just vanished into darkness. But to the right, some distance down the corridor, there was another human guard, as expected. This one was not armed with a spear, but instead had a sword sheathed at his side. A lantern hung from his hip, casting a gentle warm glow around him. The corridor beyond him opened out into a larger room. It was only then that Swordfish realized, with a stone sinking into his stomach, that the human was looking directly at him. The human's hand flew to his sword's hilt, his eyes going wide. "What? Hey!" he bellowed, his sword emerging from its scabbard with a metallic scrape.
Yike!
Swordfish yelped, flying into a panic. Without thinking, he turned the other way and belted down the darkened corridor behind him. He could hear the wet slapping of his frogs following behind him the entire way. He could barely see in this low lighting, even with his draconic vision. The only way he avoided plowing face first into a wall was because of the feeble dancing light of the guard's lantern, always just a little too close behind Swordfish for his liking. "Get back here!" the guard shouted after him, making him yelp in fear again. He looked around frantically, desperate for some sort of escape or hiding place. But even if he found one, he realized it might not be enough. The human was just too close. And if this chase kept going, the man's shouts were going to wake up the whole darn castle. And even if Swordfish lost him, what was to stop the man from running to notify the rest of the castle that there was an intruder? Swordfish's eyes flew wide. That was it. He didn't need to escape the guard. He just needed the guard to stop chasing him. He still needed answers anyway, so if he could turn the tide, even if only a little bit. Rounding a corner, he spotted a narrow archway just up ahead. He had no idea where it went, but seeing it brought an idea to mind. He nodded to his frogs, who were only barely keeping up.
There! We hide in there!
He had told them. His eyes met Kevin's again.
Your tongue still good?
Ribbit.
I'm just gonna assume that's a yes.
Swordfish dug his paws into the cold stone floor, bringing him to a sliding halt right by the archway. With a grunt of effort, he turned and leapt through. The moment his claws touched the floor, he quickly cast his eyes about the room to see where they were. The only description for the room that came to mind was broom closet. There was a wooden bucket set against the wall with a mop sticking out of it, as well as shelves lined with cloths, rags, and an assortment of brushes and other such cleaning utensils. There was even a door set into the back wall that looked like it led back into those servant passages from earlier. That would be handy in the event Swordfish needed to beat a quick getaway. But for now, he turned to Kevin. The frog was breathing hard, letting off weak croaks. Swordfish cringed at having to put him through this, but there was no choice.
Give me your tongue.
Swordfish did not wait for compliance. The soldier would be on them any second. So he reached out and pried open Kevin's mouth. Swordfish cringed in disgust as he grabbed hold of Kevin's tongue. "I have you now!" The soldier's voice bellowed from around the corner. He was almost on them. With a grunt, Swordfish pulled the tongue out as far as he could across the entrance of the door. Kevin let off a gagging croak as his tongue stretched out before him like an elastic band. Still, the frog thankfully held his ground, standing firm. Just as the tongue stretched as far as it could, the soldier came thundering into the room, high on the idea that he might just get to kill a dragon, totally oblivious to what was, in effect, a sticky tripwire at his feet. "How about you?" The soldier's attempt at a heroic shout devolved into a squeal as he ran heedlessly into the tongue. Pitching forward, he barely had the time to widen his eyes before he collapsed to the ground with a loud metallic clang, his helmet ringing like a church bell. The man let off a long, low groan as he lay there, dazed. With a giddy chuckle, Swordfish quickly kicked the door shut, blocking out any light from the corridor, leaving just the guard's now cracked lantern as the only source of illumination. The man was stirring on the floor, mumbling softly to himself.
"Quick, help me pin him,"
Swordfish instructed his frogs. Two of them were quick to obey. They hopped into position by the man's wrists, their tongues lashing out and coiling around them to hold him in place. Two more mirrored the action with his ankles. Finally, Swordfish hopped up onto his back, drawing a little oof from the man at the sudden weight. Grinning ear to ear, Swordfish grabbed the man's helmet and pulled it off, revealing a mass of messy blonde hair underneath. A stink of sweat hit Swordfish right in the face, informing him that this man had not had a bath in a while. He resisted the urge to gag and placed his claws on the back of his head. What happened? The guard slurred, shifting some more.
"You fell down,"
Swordfish told him.
You alright?
My head hurts.
Sorry.
Swordfish's expression drooped somewhat. The human may have been his enemy, but he still felt bad about hurting him. He shook himself a moment later, reminding himself that he was still in danger. He leaned forward slightly.
Anyway, do you think you could help me out?
The soldier shifted again, but did not rise. As he spoke, his words came out clearer, less confused. Wait, aren't you the dragon? Swordfish hesitated for a moment.
Yeah. My name is Swordfish. What's your name?
Swordfish? The soldier deadpanned. Really?
Hey, it's not any dumber than some of the human names I've heard, Swordfish shot back. Like Dwight. Who names their kid Dwight? Besides, I'm still a kid. I get a much cooler name when I'm an adult.
The soldier was quiet for a few seconds. What are you after, you foul beast? He snarled, trying to stand. The frogs dug in their heels, or whatever passed for heels on a frog, just managing to hold the man in place. If he really applied his strength, he could probably break free of their hold, Swordfish knew. Either that, or he could just stand up and take the frogs with him. Either way, he needed to wrap this up quickly.
I'm here to find my friend, Pondhopper, and take her home. She was brought in by your princess the other night. Pink, loud, angry all the time,
Swordfish described. The soldier continued to struggle under him, then let out a growl of anger. And why should I tell you anything, monster? Swordfish winced at the name-calling.
Come on, man, really? Do we need to be mean about this? I just want to get my friend and go. That's it, really.
Fat chance, the soldier barked. You are a dragon. You foul creatures can't resist the temptation of gold or slaughter. If I told you anything, who knows how many people you would hurt? Now Swordfish was more offended than hurt. He frowned and stood up on the soldier's back.
That's a lie! I'm a dragon, yeah, but not all of us are out to steal your gold and take all your bases or whatever. I just want to make potions with my frogs and hang out with my friend.
Well, I'm not telling you anything, the soldier shouted. Do whatever you want to me. Torture me if you want. I will never betray my kingdom to an opportunistic creature like you.
Torture? What kind of...
Swordfish began, appalled. His words trailed off, however, when he realized that he really wasn't getting anywhere arguing with this guy. And as he looked down at his claw, still sticky and wet with Kevin's tongue gunk, he got an awful, disgusting, amazing idea. He smirked.
All right. Let's do it your way,
he said, very deliberately lowering his voice to something he hoped was sinister. His naturally high pitch probably undermined the effort a little bit, but the effort itself was what counted, right? The soldier shifted anxiously under him as he placed both his claws on the back of the soldier's head. Swordfish turned to two other frogs who were awaiting instructions.
Perry? Terry?
Swordfish's smirk grew.
Make him hear mucus.
The soldier stiffened. What are you... The man's question was cut off as Terry hopped over and proceeded to shoot his tongue directly into the man's ear. A moment later, Perry hopped to his other side and repeated the process with the other ear. Over and over the taster struck, and each time the poor guy gave off disgusted cries, thrashing indignantly on the floor.
Stop it!
The man begged as the tongues came again.
Tell me where Hopper is,
Swordfish pressed, his eyes narrowing.
I have more frogs. It can get stickier.
The tower! The man babbled like a blubbering baby. The princess is in the tallest tower. She keeps her pets close. Your dragon will be there. Please, just make it stop. Swordfish gave his frogs a warm smile and a sharp nod. In an instant, both of them backed off, withdrawing their tongues. He turned back to the whimpering soldier and lightly patted him on the back of the head.
Thanks. I'm gonna go get her and go. See ya.
He chirped before hopping down from the man's back. There was a moment of quiet as Swordfish amassed his army by the door. He was about to instruct Kevin to open it up when the soldier suddenly rolled onto his back to look at him, eyes wide with confusion. Wait, what? That's it? He asked, baffled. Swordfish turned to him, still smiling.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with you. You're doing good work, and I'm not gonna hurt you just because you chased me down a hallway.
You had your minions shove their tongues in my ears. Swordfish shrugged.
I mean, I had to make you talk somehow. Sorry.
The man just stared at him. Slowly, he got back to his feet, eyes still locked on Swordfish. The man's jaw worked up and down as he fished for something to say, but nothing came out for quite a while. Finally, sounding utterly dumbstruck, the soldier asked, do you want me to get the door?
Oh, that'd be great, thanks.
After the encounter with the human guard, Swordfish made his way steadily up through the keep. He hadn't received precise instructions, only that the princess kept her pets close and would be in the tallest tower. Swordfish couldn't help but find that a touch cliché, but who was he to question it? Luckily, he didn't have any other confrontations with the guards as he was going. There were a handful of others he passed en route, but he was able to sneak past all of them. The fact that his frogs weren't drawing more attention occurred to him as being perhaps a touch odd, but he chose not to question it in the long run. After what felt like forever picking through corridors and climbing up stairs designed for full-grown humans, he came to the top of the tower. An uninteresting stone brick corridor stretched out in front of him, with a door on either side. These doors were much nicer than the others he had seen so far, making it clear that whoever was on the other sides were important. One of the doors sat slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of firelight to bleed out. There was a hushed voice coming from behind it. Swordfish kept low to the ground as he made for the door. The voice was feminine, but otherwise unfamiliar to him. He glanced back at his frogs and shook his head, silently telling them to stay back. Kevin in the front took a hop after him, eyes alight with protest, but came up short when Swordfish narrowed his eyes. Satisfied the horde would do as he bade, Swordfish turned his attention back to the door and crept a little closer. He was close enough now to make out what the voice was saying.
Now remember, Mittens is your friend. He's really friendly and really sweet, so please don't be mean to him, okay?
Just tell him to keep away from my food.
The voice of Pondhopper answered venomously. Swordfish's eyes widened, his heart beating faster in his chest. That was her! He had found her! Ha! All he had to do now was wait for the other person talking to leave, and he could get Hopper out of here. The door from the other end of the hall suddenly jerked open. Swordfish flinched back into the shadows, holding perfectly still. A tall, armored man stepped through, his strides sure and confident, his armor marking him as a knight of high stature. And Swordfish immediately got a bad feeling from him. He suddenly felt like a lost lamb, hoping it wouldn't be noticed by a nearby lion. The knight pulled open the door Hopper was behind and poked his head in. Highness, your father wishes to speak with you before bed.
Oh, of course, Hugo. I'll be right out.
The knight, Hugo, lingered in the doorway for a second. Then put Pinky in her cage. It's past her curfew. He sneered.
She'll be fine for a couple minutes on her own, won't she?
The woman asked, sounding disappointed. You know the rules, ma'am, Hugo replied, unfazed, before turning around and striding back where he had come from. He paused briefly in the middle of the hall, and Swordfish feared he had been seen. Thankfully, however, the knight's eyes turned to look out a window set into the wall the opposite direction. His hand drifted up slowly until it found the hilt of his sword. He gripped it tightly for a moment, whispered something under his breath, and then disappeared back into the other room. Swordfish waited and waited. Then, a moment later, the woman he now knew was the princess emerged from her own room and closed the door behind her. She was dressed in a simple evening gown, her hair down and messy. She practically frolicked across the hall and vanished into the other room after Hugo. Swordfish waited a second longer, then decided now was probably as good a chance as he was going to get. He turned back to his frogs and gestured for Kevin to come over. The dark frog was reluctant, his eyes lingering on the door the princess had vanished through. A low, sad-sounding croak escaped him, but after a moment he focused on the task at hand, hopping to the door. Swordfish frowned.
Hey, Kevin, are you okay? You've been kind of out of it since we got in the castle.
Again, Kevin did not answer. He merely sent out his tongue to grab the knob and unlatch the door. Swordfish eyed him for a moment, feeling concerned for the loyal little froggy. He pushed aside his worries, however, knowing that they did not have time for this right now. Any moment that night would come back, and Swordfish did not want to be here when he did. Swordfish nosed his way through the door and found himself in a large circular room with more doors along the walls. Directly across from him, one door sat partially ajar. He could just make out moonlight and the side of a bed through the narrow sliver of the room he could see. He swallowed the lump in his throat and ushered the remainder of his horde into the room before carefully nosing the door shut. It latched closed with a quiet click.
Hide,
he instructed the frogs.
If the knight or the princess comes back, just hide and wait for a chance to get away.
The frogs scattered throughout the room as instructed. But again, Kevin hesitated, casting his eyes about for a moment. Swordfish focused on him.
Kevin, snap out of it. We're not safe here.
The frog blinked, gave him a slow, sad croak, and walked, not hopped, walked, to a hiding place under a cupboard, one that had long claw marks going down the doors. Huffing, Swordfish hurried across the room to the open door and poked his head inside. It was a bedroom, and a beautiful one at that. The bed against the far left wall looked warm and cozy, and every other piece of furniture was masterfully crafted. Only the best for royalty, he guessed, and this was the best Swordfish had ever seen. His eyes scanned to the right and widened at the sight of a slapped-together wooden cage. And inside of it, curled up with her eyes closed, was none other than Pondhopper. Swordfish's grin was big enough to make his cheeks hurt. Elation overcame him, and he couldn't have stopped himself from bounding over to the bars even if he had tried.
Hopper!
He exclaimed, his voice high with relief. The young dragoness snapped her bubble blue eyes wide open. She sat upright, staring at him, and her jaw fell open.
What? Swordfish?
She asked in disbelief before moving up to the bars.
What are you doing here? Getting you out of here, duh,
Swordfish said with a smirk, his wings giving a little flap. His grin then faded when he realized that Hopper was dressed. She was wearing a thick, warm summer sweater that was the same color as sunflower petals, while a large and frilly sky blue bow was tied around her neck. Well, she looked cozy, at least. Still, he couldn't hide the amusement in his voice when he asked,
what are you wearing?
Pondhopper blinked, then shrank back, her face turning a furious shade of scarlet. Her tail beat against the floor in agitation.
Shut up,
she spat, looking away and puffing up her cheeks.
The dumb princess made me wear it.
Swordfish snickered.
Looks good on you. I will obliterate your home.
Pondhopper shot back without hesitation. Swordfish held up his claws placatingly.
Okay, sorry. Here, let me see if I can get you out of there.
He stood up on his hind legs to better inspect Hopper's cage. The top looked like it could be lifted off easily enough, assuming he could get enough leverage. He couldn't reach it from the ground, but he recalled spotting a little footstool tucked under the princess's bed. Getting an idea, he quickly ran over, grabbed one of the stool's legs in his teeth, and dragged it over. As he worked, Hopper sat in silence, fidgeting in place. She looked uncomfortable, unwilling to look in his direction. Swordfish spat out the footstool next to the cage and hopped up onto it, not saying anything. He knew how Hopper could get sometimes. Hopper finally began, her voice quiet. She swallowed heavily, sat upright, and looked directly at him.
I'm sorry.
Swordfish paused, his claws resting on the top of the cage. He looked down at Hopper and tilted his head.
What for?
Hopper looked down, sighing.
For trying to make you abduct the stupid princess. For being stupid and letting myself get caught. For making you go through all this trouble to come get me.
Swordfish blinked. Hearing Pondhopper apologize was rare enough, but for her to apologize about more than one thing at once? He was pretty sure that was a new one. A moment later, he grinned.
Aw, it's okay, Hopper. I forgive you. Besides, I would have come to get you anyway.
She looked up at him, surprised.
Really? Well, duh.
Swordfish started to push up on the top of the cage. It lifted with a slight clunk and a scrape of wood. Swordfish strained against it. It was heavier than it looked.
Come on. You're my friend, remember?
He said through gritted teeth. With that, the lid lifted enough for Hopper to jump out. She didn't do so immediately. She instead turned and picked up a comfortable blue cushion from the back of the cage, then brought it with her as she leapt over the bars and landed gracefully on the floor outside. With his friend freed, Swordfish let the lid drop before hopping down. He landed in front of Hopper, eyeing the cushion curiously but not saying anything about it. Pondhopper looked down for a few seconds, idly pawing at the floor. She looked up at him, and for a ghost of a second, Swordfish thought he saw an actual smile on her face. Not a grin of sadism or a smirk of cocky anticipation. Just a friendly, affectionate smile.
Thank you,
she finally said, her voice soft. Swordfish grinned and pounced on her, wrapping her up in a tight hug. She squawked in surprise, then started squirming.
No, that's okay. Hugs are a bit much. Not a hugger.
Swordfish released her with a roll of his eyes, though he couldn't miss how her smile was slightly larger. He chose not to comment on it, though, wisely.
All right, you ready to get out of here?
He asked, standing back up to his full height.
Oh, I have been ready since I got here,
Hopper said, hefting her cushion up onto her back.
Come on, let's go.
Swordfish quirked a brow and finally decided to ask.
Wait, you're taking the cushion and clothes? Why?
Hopper hesitated, her eyes slowly widening as her cheeks, once again, turned red. She looked away, her wings ruffling anxiously.
They're...
She mumbled, her voice too low for Swordfish to make out the words. He leaned forward, tilting his head.
What?
Pondhopper groaned and slapped a paw against the ground.
I said they're comfy, okay? I'm taking the clothes and the cushion for my hoard because they're comfy and warm.
Swordfish just stared at her for a moment, eyes wide. A moment later, he started laughing. Hopper's cheeks puffed up again.
Don't make me hurt you, Swordfish.
she threatened. The swordfish knew that it was just in jest. He shook his head and patted her on the head, earning an angry snort before moving past her and for the door.
Okay. Come on, let's get out of here before any more.
He began to say as he emerged back out into the large room. His words died in his throat, however, when he saw the figure standing in the door they needed to go through. Hugo kicked the door shut behind him, his sword sliding out of its scabbard with a metallic hiss. "Ah, good," he said, a bloodthirsty edge in his voice. "Just the excuse I was waiting for."